Hello and welcome to another episode of Raw Chatter. I am your host speaking, Vicky Midwood, human health optimizer and the addiction eliminator. And I want to ask you a question. How many times have you swallowed your truth because you were afraid of being rude? How many times have you over-explained or justified something, adding extra fluff just because you didn't want to appear to be rude? Yes, today's topic is being scared of being seen to be rude. And as some of you who are regular listeners will know, I often get my topics for these podcasts through conversations that I have either with other people in networking or on social media or just generally out and about, or with my clients. And this is a big one that has cropped up a lot of times in the last week. So many people are caveating before they say something. I don't want you to think I'm rude. I don't want to sound rude. And it got me kind of pondering, where has this fear of being seen to be rude come from? Because it's right across all ages. It's young people and it's older middle-aged people too, who have this fear of being impolite or bad-mannered. And it's a topic that I've been looking into because it all really does tie in with perfectionism, with fear of being judged, with fear of being not liked. And what really it's about is avoiding conflict a lot of the time. But what I want to kind of really look into is, how does it affect us? And I'm saying us because I used to be that over-explainer and that justifier. And I would often feel I had to make people understand the reasons why I was saying what I was saying. And it's only when I went through rehab and understood that it's okay to speak your truth and it's okay to not over explain, and it's okay to not have to feel compelled to justify your reasons for saying what you say or not doing what you say you don't want to do. And a lot of it actually, I believe, comes down to cultural conditioning. Was having this conversation about just in a restaurant, for example. And in the UK, I think very much we have a lot of people, I'm not saying it's across the board, but a lot of people have been brought up to say please and thank you. And it's just considered good manners. And so I was having this conversation with somebody actually in a networking meeting about how it was, to me, a bit of a shock to the system. The first time I went to America, and it was in a Starbucks actually, witnessing people who were ordering in the line and just not saying please after what they'd ordered, and not saying thank you when they got their ticket for a receipt, which, if you are brought up in the UK, it's just one of those things that you do on an automatic pilot. You know, we get teachers saying, say thank you or say please. We get grandparents prompting us. And so it is something that I believe is very much cultural. Whereas in America, it was only me and my daughter who were aghast, thinking it was rude, until we realized that actually, no, pretty much everybody was doing that. And therefore, we were the ones who were not fitting into that culture. And that's why they think it's quite sweet and it's quite cute that us people from the UK say this stuff, because they're genuinely not used to it, and therefore there is no expectation. So to me, did it sound rude? Yes, but purely and simply because it's not the norm that I was used to. And so this is where I'm inviting you, if you know that you don't say something that perhaps you'd like to say because you're scared of being rude, just ask yourself, is it actually a cultural thing? And realistically, would it be taken as rude if I just answered the question? without following up with a justification or an explanation or a thank you or a please, or just going a little bit over the top. So that's the first thing. The other thing is that, and this is something that I kind of struggled with to some degree. And if you're listening and you are a high achiever and you have been somebody who has been brought up to have politeness as the thing that's more important over being authentic, over being your true self, then it's a bit of a challenge to take this on board, because when we don't actually say what it is we want to say, when we're not being truthful, basically when we're not being ourselves, when we're not speaking from authenticity, how does that affect you? Because in hindsight, it didn't used to make me feel good, even though I convinced myself that it would, because I was being polite and I was being nice and I was being, in inverted commas, kind. But actually, I wasn't being authentic. I wasn't actually being true to myself. And a lot of the times it meant that I wasn't putting in place any boundaries that would be both good for me and for the other person and for our relationship. And also, I didn't back then necessarily understand what the difference was between being rude, genuinely ill-mannered, and the actual definition, if you look in the dictionary, is offensively impolite or ill-mannered. But what is offensive to one person is, as I just said, in America, not saying please or thank you when you order a coffee. That is not ill-mannered. It's just the norm. And so oftentimes we also have to look at the fact that people who are assertive, people who are very confident, if you are somebody who's been brought up in an environment where you have had early lessons, shall we say, in politeness over authenticity, you may well think that somebody being assertive is being rude. But are they? Or are they just being truthful and honest, and being aligned with who they are? And so this is, I know, probably a bit of a challenging conversation for some people, because learning to be assertive and learning to put boundaries in place is crucial, especially if you are somebody who is a people pleaser, has got very high expectations, believes that they need to be better than to be good enough. Then you're going to struggle with being authentic, because to be able to do that, we put on masks and we pretend to be a certain person on the outside, but on the inside, our head chatter, our inner chatter is saying something completely different. And this is where we can sometimes feel truly out of alignment with ourselves. And I know that for some of the clients that I work with, that inner chatter, which is sometimes mean and disrespectful, they regard as them being evil or bad, because there is such a powerful belief that you always have to be polite and kind and put the other person's needs or the expectation that you think their needs are above your own. But what it actually means is that you're not being true to yourself. And that absolutely does cause internal conflict. It really, really does. And often it can cause genuine issues later on down the line, because we may say something to be polite, but then it can come back and bite us later on, because often there are consequences when you are not authentic. Not usually for the other person, but for you. And so learning that assertiveness is not rudeness is the first step. And the key, I believe, to understanding the difference is we always come from being assertive from a place of starting with yourself. This is you, this is your thoughts, these are your feelings, etc. And it's not about the other person. So we're not going to be poking fingers at them, and we're not going to be assertive in a way that could potentially feel derogatory or harmful. One thing that I have learned over years is that you cannot know for certain whether somebody is going to be offended by something or not. And what's interesting is that the same person, depending on the state of mind, the energetic state that they are in, what's been happening to them prior to the conversation, the same person can find something very inoffensive one day and find the exact same thing offensive the next. And that is not about the thing that you've said or you, it's about them. It's about them and where they are. But I think the main reason, and this is the thing that we really have to take on board, is that we are trying to avoid conflict and judgment. And that is key. When we avoid conflict and judgment at any cost, it means that on an emotional regulatory level, should we then be in a situation where we are definitely being judged and when there definitely is conflict, we don't have the skills to be able to handle those emotions. And this is where we then start to overthink things, overanalyze things, go inwards, take things personally. Whereas if we actually practice being in a situation where there potentially is a little bit of conflict, where you are going to have to handle judgment, then you can start to build your emotional resilience. Because if we go through life not being authentic to ourselves, not putting in boundaries, not actually telling the whole truth to avoid conflict, saying yes to be polite when actually we want to say no, we are going to find that we will potentially have physical health issues, as well as struggle with mood, anxiety, potentially depression, because it's unsustainable. And the more we don't practice the skill of mental resilience, the less able we're going to handle what life throws at us. And as we get older and as we expand our horizons and the amounts of people that we come into contact with and the kinds of environments that we find ourselves in, as we open ourselves up to more life experiences, the less able you are to be able to manage your emotions, and really basically the less opportunity you've had to really work on that mental resilience muscle, the more you're going to feel incapable, not good enough. And then you have got a very dangerous downward spiral, because anxiety is really just a fear of us not being able or capable of handling a situation. And if we've learned how to deal with conflict, and if we've learned how to handle being judged and recognizing that it's not personal, and if we are honest and say what we need to say with the right tone of voice, with the right emphasis on the words that make the difference between it being just an acceptable statement or something that's potentially a question where you're looking for some kind of permission, then if you can practice that, you'll recognize that the way that we say stuff is just as important as the actual words that we use. And mastering both of those two things, when it comes to feeling judged or when it comes to conflict type of situation, means that you learn some powerful communication skills, which unfortunately we do not get taught at school. And if you do come from a family background where they're not great communicators, where they're very much critical and judgmental in terms of how they communicate, then we often learn to be defensive, but also we learn that it's safer to not be rude, to not rock the boat, upset the apple cart, or whatever terminology you might want to use. And therefore, we say to ourselves, well, I'm being kind and I'm being nice and I'm being thoughtful. But then you need to ask yourself, how is that affecting me? Because if it means that you're not telling your truth for the fear of being rude, then you're not really allowing yourself to have your own needs. And this kind of then almost reinforces this idea that we shouldn't have needs, that somehow having needs is wrong or bad or weak. And often these are the things that we really need to be looking at, because not giving yourself what you need, often it's coming from a place of lack, a place of scarcity. And for some people that shows up as not being able to spend any money on themselves, not being able or not allowing themselves to eat enough food, because why should I have needs? Because I am inferior in some way, I am not good enough. And all of this stuff comes down to the fact that we're not recognizing ourselves as equal, as a human, as other people. And it's usually because it stems from this inability to recognize that we are enough. Our wants and our needs are just as important as other people. But if we bend ourselves to fit the people that we're with and the circumstances that we're in, and we don't want to be seen to be the person who is different or who doesn't conform, then often we twist that to be that we better be kind and we better be nice. And even if we want to say something, we either keep our mouth shut or we kind of make it up so it sounds okay and won't offend anybody. In other words, will not be perceived as being rude. But if speaking your truth makes you rude, then what does being silent make you? And so what if you are seen to be, by somebody else's standard, rude? Because ultimately it is about their standards and their judgments. Now, you may find, and often this is the case, the people who say to me, I don't want to come across as rude, I don't want you to think I'm rude, they are often extremely judgmental themselves, and they often have conflict going on internally in their own heads. And this is something that I want you to maybe just process and ponder on. Is that you? Because usually the harshest judges are the people who judge themselves the harshest. And we have not just high expectations of ourselves, but high expectations of others. But we also think that if that's the case, if I think like that, then other people must also. And it was a complete game changer for me to learn that everybody does not think the same. And I know it was ridiculously grandiose and arrogant of me to think that everybody thought like I did, and the people that didn't think like I did were either imbeciles or stupid or ignoramuses. And I hear those words and I hear my dad's voice. Those are the words that I grew up in. My dad was incredibly judgmental of other people. Why? Because deep down, his self-worth was pretty low. He didn't think that he was good enough. He was always striving to be better than, to somehow prove himself, to get some kind of validation, because he never got it. He never got it from his dad. He didn't get it from his school teachers. He lived in an era where the belief was the harder you're punished, the more you'll be pushed to do better. And what that often means is then that you end up doing things and saying things that are completely out of integrity to the person that you are, but also make you question, do you even know yourself? And do you actually know what genuinely is assertive and what is rude? And this is the stuff that I do work through with some of my clients, because putting boundaries in place and saying, actually, no, that is not acceptable to me, or when you do that, I actually feel quite uncomfortable and I'd prefer it if you could do this instead. This is the stuff that we need to do. Now, there's ways of being assertive. I just gave you an example. It's just saying there that you're saying what the thing is, how you feel about it, but crucially what you would like the other person to do instead. When it becomes rude and when it becomes offensive is when we start poking the finger and start going, you make me feel, or you made me do that. Because as soon as we throw in that accusatory tone, yes, you're setting down the ground rules for conflict, for an argument. You're setting down the rules for somebody else to judge you or tell you that you are wrong. And therefore, the way that we put in boundaries, the words that we use, the thoughts that we have in our own heads are crucial. Because are you judging other people on your standards? And how do you feel? And I'm going to leave you with this and keeping it a short one today. How do you feel if somebody just answers one of your questions with a straightforward, direct answer? Would you like a piece of cake? No, thank you. With no justification, no reasoning on the end. Do you think that's rude? Because if you don't think that that is rude, then you have to question, why do I believe other people are going to take the way I say things as being rude? So I'm gonna leave you with some questions to ponder on this one. And there isn't a right answer. There is your answer. So maybe this is something that you might want to journal on. So first of all, who taught you that speaking your truth was rude? And was it true then? And is it true now? That's the first little question. The next one, how much of your energy is spent editing yourself to avoid conflict or judgment? How much time in your head do you actually waste on doing that stuff? Next one, if setting boundaries and being honest makes you rude, then what does abandoning yourself make you? Now, as I said, there are no right answers here, but I think this would be an interesting exercise to do. How would your relationships change with other people if you stopped trying to be polite? In other words, if you stopped trying to be seen to be rude. Next question. What's the worst that could happen if you said what you meant and you meant what you said? In other words, if you were true to yourself in integrity and authentic. And then final one, when was the last time you over-explained your decision because you didn't want to seem to be rude? Because here's the truth, folks. If you are terrified of being rude, then you're probably shrinking yourself for the comfort of other people. But your truth, it matters. Your needs, they do matter. And if somebody thinks that you are rude for setting boundaries or for speaking up, then that's a reflection of theirs. It's a reflection of their expectations, but that's not your reality. So I want to challenge you this week. Say the thing. Set the boundary. Let them feel however they feel. Because your job is not to make people comfortable. It is to live in alignment with who you are. And that, dear listener, is never rude. I hope you found this helpful. If you have, please do give me a thumbs up, give me a like. If you haven't yet subscribed, please do so. And if you think that this episode may be helpful to somebody that you know, please do pass the link on to them so that we can grow this podcast and help more people to start feeling better about themselves. And I'm going to leave you with this, as I always do. We only have one life, as far as we know, and one body. So please look after it, because it is looking after you. Until the next time, take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.